The war on Greys had been brutal, a grinding conflict of attrition between two interstellar powers that left a once lush planet, a wasteland of craters' ash, and twisted metal the ground was, littered with the detritus of battle, shattered armor, smoldering wreckage, and the bodies of soldiers, both human and alien, who had fought and died for control of the strategic world. The air was thick with the acrid scent of burnt vegetation, and ozone the remnants of energy weapons that had scorched the earth. Amid the desolation, one figure lay motionless, nearly hidden beneath the twisted remains of a downed warship. It was Roker, a Garm award genetically engineered by the Zarnak, an alien species known for their brutal efficiency in warfare. RAR had been bred for combat. His massive wolf-like frame, covered in thick armor-like scales, and his powerful jaws capable of tearing through steel. Yet now he lay wounded and forgotten, abandoned by the very soldiers he had been trained to protect. His left flank was torn open, a deep gash leaking dark viscous blood that stained the ground beneath him. His breathing was labored, each rise and fall of his chest a painful effort. Roar's once bright eyes, which had glowed with fierce determination in the heat of battle, were now dull and glazed with the haze of approaching death. The Zarnak had retreated, leaving their wounded behind. In their haste to escape the relentless human advance, for them a wounded Garm was a liability, a resource no longer worth preserving. Roker was just another casualty of war, discarded like so much scrap metal on the killing fields of Garrus. Sergeant Max Arlen, a human combat medic, moved cautiously through the battlefield, his footsteps muffled by the thick layer of ash that coated the ground. His job was to search for survivors, those who might still cling to life amidst the devastation. It was a grim task, but one he was accustomed to after years of service in the galactic conflict. Max's scanner beeped intermittently, guiding him through the ruins of the battlefield. The landscape was eerily silent, save for the occasional crackle of a small fire or the distant rumble of collapsing debris. Max had already found several wounded soldiers and had directed medac units to their locations, but now, as he approached the wreckage of the Zarnak warship, his scanner picked up something different, something larger. Curiosity piqued. Max cautiously approached the twisted hulk of metal, his blaster drawn just in case. As he rounded the corner of the wreckage, he froze at the sight before him. There, partially hidden by the debris, was RAR. The G's massive body was curled on itself, his sides heaving with shallow breaths. Even in his weakened state, the creature was an imposing sight. Max's first instinct was to back away. He had heard stories of the Garm, how they could rip a man in half with single little bite, how they were feared across the galaxy as the ultimate war beasts. But as he looked closer, he saw something in Roar's eyes that gave him pause. There was no malice, no aggression, only pain and a deep, haunting sadness. Lowering his blaster, Max slowly approached the wounded creature. "Easy, boy," he murmured, his voice soft and steady. "I'm not going to hurt you." Roar's ears twitched at the sound of Max's voice, and he let out a low pee-whine. It was a sound that tugged at Max's heartstrings, reminding him of the dogs he had grown up with back on Earth. The creature before him might be a product of alien engineering, but in this moment, he was just a wounded animal in need of help. Max knelt beside RAR, moving slowly to avoid startling him. The wound on the G's flank was severe, and without immediate medical attention, he wouldn't survive much longer. Max hesitated for a moment, knowing the risks of trying to help such a dangerous creature, but he couldn't just leave him to die, not when there was a chance, however slim, to save him. "Hold on, big guy," Max said as he reached into his pack for his medkit. "I'm going to take care of you." As he began to work applying a coagulant to slow the bleeding and administering pain relief, RAR watched him with weary, tired eyes. Max could feel the Garm's muscles tensing beneath his hands, but there was no attempt to bite or lash out. It was as if RAR understood that this human was trying to help him after stabilizing Roar's condition as best he could. Max knew he couldn't leave the Garm behind. He activated his comms and called for an extraction, requesting a specialized medac unit equipped to handle the transport of large non-human life forms. It was an unusual request, and Max knew it would raise eyebrows, but he didn't care. This creature deserved a chance. As they waited for the extraction team, Max stayed by Roar's side, speaking to him in soothing tones. He knew the Garm couldn't understand his words, but the sound of his voice seemed to have a calming effect. Slowly, Roar's breathing steadied, and the tension in his body began to ease. When the medac unit arrived, Max helped the team carefully load RAR onto a stretcher designed for large animals as they lifted off from the battlefield. Max looked down at the wounded Garm, a sense of determination settling over him. He had no idea what would happen next. But he was resolved to see this through. RAR had been left to die on the battlefield, but Max had found him, and as far as he was concerned, that meant RAR was now under his care whatever it took. He would make sure this war got the chance he deserved to survive. The Medac shuttle hummed softly as it ascended from the battlefield, cutting through the atmosphere of GIS on its way to the orbiting medical. Station Max sat beside RAR, watching Garm closely as the medical team administered additional care to the Garms. Breathing was still shallow, but his condition had stabilized somewhat since Max had first found him. The station was a hive of activity as the shuttle docked with medical personnel bustling about tending to the injured brought in from the latest battle. As soon as the shuttle doors opened, a team of doctors and nurses hurried over, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern when they saw the massive alien ward being carefully unloaded. Dr. Amelia Vosta, station's chief medical officer, was among them. She had seen her fair share of alien species over the course of her career, but arm was a rarity, especially one brought in for treatment rather than interrogation or study. What do we have here? She asked, her voice carrying a note of both professionalism and intrigue. Arm Max replied, his tone firm. He was left behind on the battlefield. He's injured pretty badly, but he's stable for now. I couldn't just leave him to die out there. Dr. Voss nodded, her sharp eyes assessing Roar condition. Get him to Bay 12, she ordered her team. We'll need to run a full scan, stabilize the wound, and start him on xenobiotic treatments. And someone get the Xenovet on the comm. This is going to be a complicated case. As the medical team wheeled RAR away on a specialized stretcher, Max stayed close, feeling a protective instinct rising within him. He knew that many would see RAR as nothing more than a dangerous weapon and asset, a war no different from a discarded piece of machinery, but to Max, Roker was a living being, one who had shown no aggression. Despite his suffering once in the medical bay, the team worked quickly and efficiently. Dr. Voss supervised the operation, her hands moving with practiced precision as she closed the deep gash in Roar's flank. The creature's physiology was complex, with layers of muscle and armor-like scales that required specialized techniques and tools. Throughout the procedure, RAR remained remarkably calm, his eyes occasionally flickering open to glance at Max, who watched from a safe distance. Over the next few days, Roar's recovery began in earnest. His body responded well to the treatment, and the medical staff was able to treat the radiation poisoning that had set in from the battlefield's lingering hazards. Dr. Voss, initially skeptical about the effort being put into saving a Garm, found herself increasingly fascinated by Roar's resilience and the growing bond between the creature and Max. Max visited RAR as often as he could, bringing meals specially formulated by the medical team to suit the Garm's dietary needs. He would sit by Roar's side, talking to him in a low, comforting voice about anything and everything, his life on Earth, the war, and even mundane things like his favorite foods or memories from childhood. Though RAR couldn't respond in words as large, amber eyes seemed to take it all in, and the slow, rhythmic thump of his tail on the medical bay floor became a sign that he was regaining his strength. As the days turned into weeks, Rokar's condition steadily improved. The once fearsome war began to show signs of a gentler, more trusting nature. His wounds healed under the careful ministrations of Dr. Voss and her team, and his strength returned, evident in the renewed vigor with which he moved around the medical bay. Max's connection with RAR deepened as they spent more time together. What had started as simple care and concern for an injured creature grew into something more profound. Max began to train RAR not as a war beast, but as a companion and partner. He introduced basic commands like sit and stay, using a combination of gestures and words. RAR, with his keen intelligence, picked up on these quickly, and soon Max was teaching him more complex tasks, always encouraging him with gentle praise and treats. Dr. Voss noticed a change in RAR. The once distrustful and wary creature was now calm and responsive, especially in Max's presence. Humans come a long way, she remarked one day, OBS obeying as RAR obediently followed Max's commands with a level of focus and discipline that was remarkable for any creature, let alone one breed. For war, you've done something extraordinary here, Max. Max smiled, scratching behind Roar's ears, which elicited a low, contented rumble from the Garm. I think He just needed someone to believe in him. He replied, hewn, not just a weapon he's. More than that, he deserves a chance to be something more the bond between Max. And RAR was undeniable, and it didn't go unnoticed by the station's command. The idea of a GARM serving in a non-combat role was unconventional, but Roar's progress was a testament to what could be achieved with care, patience, and a willingness to see beyond the creatures. Origins Max began to consider a future beyond the war of future, where he and RAR could work together, perhaps in search and rescue missions where Roar's strength and keen senses could be put to use in saving lives rather than taking them. It was a bold idea, one that he knew would require approval from higher up, but the thought of giving RAR a purpose beyond the battlefield was something that fueled Max's determination. One afternoon, as Max and RAR were playing in a small secured area outside the medical bay, Max tossed a ball for RAR to chase. The GARM bounded after it with enthusiasm. His movements, fluid and powerful, a far cry from the wounded creature Max had found on Garrus. When Roar returned with the ball, he dropped it at Max's feet and looked up at him with an expression that was almost expectant. Good boy, Max said, crouching down to ruffle Roar's fur. The GARM leaned into the touch, his tail wagging slowly. Max couldn't help but smile in that moment. He knew without a doubt that saving RAR had been the right decision. As they sat together, the sun setting behind them, Max felt a deep sense of contentment and purpose. The war might still be raging across the galaxy, but here in this quiet moment there was peace, and in that peace a bond had been forged that neither the chaos of battle nor the prejudice of others could break. RAR, once abandoned and left for dead, had found a new life, a new purpose, and Max, who had always been driven by his duty to heal, had found a companion who had come to mean more to him than he ever could have imagined. Together, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, not as soldier and warg, but as partners in a new mission to bring hope and healing to a war-torn galaxy. Roar's transformation from a wounded war dog into a trusted companion had not gone unnoticed by the command staff aboard the medical station. What began as whispers of curiosity soon turned into open discussions among the higher-ups. The idea of a GAR serving in a non-combat role was revolutionary, but Roar's remarkable progress and the deep bond he shared with Max made it a possibility worth exploring. One evening, as Max was sitting with RAR in their now familiar routine of comp and ionship and training, he received a message summoning him to a meeting with Colonel Harris. The station's commanding officer. Max felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness as he made his way to the colonel's office, leaving RAR resting comfortably in the medical bay. Colonel Harris was a stern, non-nonsense leader with a reputation for valuing results over sentimentality. As Max entered the office, he was greeted by the colonel's piercing gaze and the presence of Dr. Voss, who sat beside him. The atmosphere was serious, but Max could see a glint of something in Dr. Voss's eyes, something that looked like encouragement. Sergeant Aaron, Colonel Harris began, his voice steady and authoritative. I've been informed about the GARM you rescued and the progress he's made under your care. Dr. Voss has provided glowing reports on his recovery and training. Frankly, this is an unprecedented situation. Max nodded, standing at attention. Yes, Sir. RAR has shown remarkable adaptability and intelligence. I believe he can be an asset not just in combat, but in other capacities as well. Colonel Harris leaned back in his chair, considering Max's words. Dr. Voss tells me you've been working on training RAR for search and rescue missions. Is that correct? Yes, Sir. Max confirmed. He has an exceptional sense of smell and hearing far beyond what our technology can replicate. I believe he could be invaluable in locating survivors, especially in situations where conventional equipment might fail. The colonel glanced at Voss, who gave a slight nod. What you're proposing is unconventional, Sergeant. The GARM are bred for war, not for rescue missions, but your work with RAR has demonstrated that perhaps we've been underestimating their potential. Max took a deep breath, sensing an opportunity. Sir. RAR isn't just a weapon. He's shown loyalty, intelligence, and a willingness to learn. With the right guidance, he could redefine how we view these creatures. Instead of being used purely for destruction, they could be partners in saving lives. Colonel Harris was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, his gaze locking onto Max's. Sergeant, if we Authorize that you'll be taking full responsibility for RAR. Any failure, any incident will fall on you, RU. Prepared for that without hesitation, Max replied, I am, sir. I believe in RAR and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove his worth. The colonel studied him for a moment longer before finally, nodding, very well, I'm approving your request. You will continue training RAR under the guidance of Dr. Voss, and when you're ready, we'll assign you to your first search and rescue mission. I don't need to tell you what's at stake. Here's Sergeant. Make it work. Thank you, Sir. Max said, a mixture of relief and determination flooding through him. As he left the office, Dr. Voss caught up with him, a small smile on her lips. You've just made history, Max, she said, soft L, and you've given RAR a chance that no one else would have. Max smiled back, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He deserves it, and I won't let him down. The day of their first mission came sooner than expected. A civilian transport ship had gone down on the remote ice planet Tros, and early reports suggested that the freezing temperatures and unstable terrain made it nearly impossible to locate survivors using standard search protocols. The rescue team needed someone or something that could navigate the harsh conditions and find those still alive before it was too late. Max and RAR were called into action. The decision to deploy them had been met with skepticism from some quarters, but the urgency of the situation left little room for debate. Max knew this mission was more than just a test of their capabilities. It was a chance to prove to everyone, including himself, that Roar's transformation was real and that they could make a difference as they approach Tros. Max reviewed the mission details with RAR, who sat calmly beside him. In the shuttle's hold, the planet was known for its extreme cold and unpredictable weather patterns, with deep crevasses hidden beneath layers of snow and ice. The wreckage of the transport ship was located in one of the most treacherous regions, and the clock was ticking. We've got this, Max said, resting a hand on Roar's broad back. The Garm leaned into the touch, his amber eyes focused and alert. He seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, his demeanor calm yet ready. The shuttle touched down on the icy surface. With a jolt, the howling winds outside making the hull groan. Max adjusted his gear, ensuring his thermal suit was sealed properly before turning to RAR. Stay close, buddy. We're going to find them. The hatch open, and the freezing wind hit them like a wall. RAR was the first to leap out, his powerful legs easily navigating the snow as he began to sniff the air, searching for any trace of survivors. Max followed, relying on Roar's instincts to guide them. The search was grueling. The cold was relentless, and visibility was limited to just a few feet in any direction. Max had to trust RAR completely, following the Garm as he weaved through the snowdrifts, icy outcroppings. Every now and then Roar would pause, his ears twitching as he listened for any sound that might indicate a survivor. After hours of searching, Max was beginning to fear the worst when Roar suddenly froze his head. Snapping to the right, he let out a low growl, then barked a signal they had practiced in training. Max's heart raced as he rushed to Roar's side, peering into the blinding white there partially buried under a collapsed section of the ship's hull was a small group of survivors. They were huddled together, barely conscious, their faces pale and lips blue from the cold. Max wasted no time activating his comm to call an extraction team, while he and RAR began to dig them out. Roar's strength and agility were invaluable, and together they managed to free the survivors from the wreckage. Max worked quickly, administering first aid and thermal blankets to ward off hypothermia. The survivors were weak, but they were alive thanks to Roar's keen senses and unwavering determination. As the extraction team arrived and began to transport the survivors back to the shuttle, Max took a moment to kneel beside RAR, who was panting heavily, but otherwise looked proud. You did it, Max said, his voice filled with emotion. You found them, you saved them. RAR leaned into Max's tail, wagging slowly, a sign of his own satisfaction. The bond between them had been forged in the fires of war and tested in the icy grip of Tros, and it had held strong. Together they had achieved what many thought impossible. Back on the shuttle, as they headed home, Max couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment. RAR, once abandoned on a battlefield, had become a hero in his own right. The G's journey from a tool of war to a savior of lives was a story of redemption and the power of compassion. Max knew this was only the beginning of their work together, and he looked forward to the many lives they would save in the future. As they flew through the stars, Roka lay beside Max's head, Resting on his lap content in the knowledge that he had finally found his place, Max stroked his fur grateful for the partnership. They had forged a partnership that had turned a weapon of war into a beacon of hope. The successful rescue on Tross didn't just save the lives of civilians. It sent ripples through the ranks of the human military. And beyond, news of Roar's role in the mission spread quickly, and soon reports were circulating about the Garm who had defied expectations and proven his worth as more than just a weapon of war. Max and Roar returned to the medical station to a hero's welcome. The station's crew, who had initially been skeptical about the presence of the Garm, now regarded Roar with a mixture of admiration and respect. Colonel Harris himself greeted them as they disembarked from the shuttle, a rare smile breaking through his usual stern expression. Sergeant Aaron, RAR, the colonel said, nodding at them both. You've done something remarkable. The success of this mission has opened up new possibilities for how we think about these creatures and about how we fight this war. Max felt a surge of pride as he looked down at RAR, who sat calmly beside his head held high. Thank you, Sir Rourke. Been incredible. I'm just glad we were able to bring those people home. Dr. Voss, who had also come to greet them, stepped forward and placed a hand on Rourke's back. You've both shown that there's more to the Guard than we ever realized. This could change everything. But even as the accolades poured in, not everyone was convinced. Within the higher echelons of the military, there were those who viewed RAR's success with suspicion rather than admiration, saw him as a liability, a creature bred for war whose instincts might one day override his training and loyalty. As the weeks passed, Max began to notice the subtle signs of doubt creeping, and he overheard whispered conversations in the corridors, caught the wary glances of some of the officers when they passed RAR, and sensed the underlying tension in briefings where Roar's role was discussed. It seemed that for every person who saw RAR as a hero, there was another who saw him as a ticking time bomb. One evening, as Max was going over mission reports in his quarters, Dr. Voss visited him. Her face was lined with concern, and Max could tell that something was weighing on her mind. Max, she began, sitting down across from him, I've been hearing things. Some of the higher-ups are questioning whether it's safe to keep RAR in active duty. They're worried about what might happen if he loses control. In a high-stress situation, Max felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Roar's never shown any signs of aggression since he's been with me. HEK proven himself. He saved lives on Tross. Why would they doubt him now? Dr. Voss sighed, rubbing her temples. Because they're afraid, Max. They don't understand the bond you formed with him, and they're not sure it enough to override his conditioning. As a war beast, there's talk of reassigning him to a research facility, or worse, decommissioning him altogether. The words hit Max like a physical blow. The thought of losing RAR, of having him taken away or put down, was unbearable. He had seen firsthand the intelligence, loyalty, and compassion the Garm was capable of. To treat him as nothing more than a dangerous animal would be a grave injustice. They can't do that. Max said, his voice tight with emotion. Roker isn't just a weapon. HEK more than that, and Hune's proven it. We can't let them take him away. Dr. Voss nodded, her expression resolute. I agree, Max, but we're going to have to fight for him. We need to prove beyond any doubt that RAR is not a threat, that he can be trusted in any situation. And we're going to need to do it soon, before any decisions are made. Max knew what she was saying was true, but the thought of having to prove Roar's worth all over again filled him with frustration and anger. Still, he knew he couldn't afford to let those emotions cloud his judgment. He needed to stay focused, to find a way to demonstrate that RAR was not just a reliable partner, but an irreplaceable asset. I'll do whatever it takes, Max said, determination hardening his voice. We've come too far to let them take this away from us. Dr. Voss placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. And I'll help you, Max. We'll find a way to show them that RAR belongs here with you on the front lines, where he can make a difference. Together, they began to plan their next steps, knowing that the battle for Roar's future was just beginning. The opportunity to prove Roar's worth came sooner than either Max or Dr. Voss expected. A distress call from a research outpost on the planet Iskor had come in, reporting a catastrophic containment breach of a bioweapon experiment gone wrong. The outpost was deep in enemy territory, and the nature of the bioweapon, a highly aggressive, rapidly mutating organism, meant that traditional rescue teams were unlikely to reach the scientists in time. Max was summoned to Colonel Harris's office, where he found the Colonel, Dr. Voss, and several high-ranking officers gathered around a Holo display showing the dire Sidhu citation. On Iskor, the image flickered, revealing the barren storm-racked surface of the planet with the outpost barely visible to the swirling dust and debris. Sergeant Aaron Colonel Harris began his tone serious. We got a situation. The bioweapon at Iskander is out of control and the scientists trapped. There have only hours left before the containment completely fails. We need a team to go and extract them and neutralize the threat. Max nodded, already feeling the adrenaline beginning to pump through his veins. We're ready, sir. Colonel Harris's gaze narrowed. There are some who believe this is too dangerous a mission for your partner, but I believe it's the perfect test. If RAR can perform under these conditions, it will go a long way towards silencing his critics. But understand this, Sergeant. If anything goes wrong, the blame falls squarely on you. Max felt the weight of the colonel's words, but he met the older man's gaze without flinching. RAR, and I won't let you down. Very well, Colonel Harris said, his tone leaving no room for doubt. You have the best equipment we can spare, but time is against us. The shuttle leaves in 1 hour. Max returned to the medical bay, where RAR was waiting, his keen eyes watching Max's every move. Max knelt beside him, feeling the pressure of the mission ahead. We've got a tough one, RAR, he said, quietly scratching behind the Garm's ears, but I know you're up for it. We've been through a lot bot together, and this is our chance to show everyone what you're really made of. RAR responded with a low, rumbling growl of acknowledgement, his powerful body tensing with anticipation. The bond between them was stronger than ever, and Max knew that they would face whatever lay ahead together. The shuttle ride to Iskor was tense, the silence broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional update from the pilot. Max reviewed the mission details, going over the plan in his mind. They would have to breach the outpost perimeter, locate the scientist, and then find a way to neutralize the bioweapon, all while avoiding the mutated organisms that had already begun to overrun the facility. When they arrived at Iskander, the planet's harsh environment greeted them. With howling winds and stinging dust, the shuttle touched down as close to the outpost as possible, and Max and RAR disembarked into the hostile atmosphere. The landscape was desolate with jagged rocks and swirling debris, making visibility difficult. Roar's enhanced senses were invaluable in navigating the treacherous terrain, his nose leading them unerringly toward the outpost entrance. As they approached the facility, the true extent of the damage became apparent. The outer walls were breached and signs of the mutated organisms were everywhere. Strange, pulsating growths that clung to the walls and spread like a malignant fungus. Max activated his biohazard suit, and Roar's armor automatically adjusted to protect him from the contaminants. Inside the outpost, the air was thick with the smell of decay and chemicals. The corridors were dimly lit with flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Roker moved ahead, his powerful muscles rippling beneath his armor as he sniffed the air, searching for any sign of the scientist. Suddenly, RAR stopped, his body tensing as he let out a low growl. Max knew that sound. It was a warning. They were not alone. Out of the shadows emerged one of the mutated organisms, a grotesque, twisted mass of flesh and sinew that had once been a living creature. Its many eyes glowed with sickly green light, and its mouth, filled with rows of sharp teeth, opened. In a guttural hiss, it lunged at them with unnatural speed, but RAR was faster. With a snarl, Roker charged, his powerful jaws clamping down on the creature's neck and tearing it apart with a single savage shake. The organism collapsed in a heap, its body dissolving into a noxious puddle of slime. Max didn't have time to react to the horror of what they were facing. Good boy, he muttered before they pressed on, moving deeper into the facility. The sound of voices guided them to a reinforced lab, where the remaining scientists had barricaded themselves. The door was sealed, but Roar's keen senses detected their presence. Max activated his comms and connected with the scientists inside, confirming that they were still alive, but running out of time. The bioweapon was breaking down the last of the containment protocol, OLS, and they needed to be extracted immediately. As Max and RAR worked to secure the area, more of the mutated organisms began to emerge from the shadows, drawn to the noise and the scent of fresh prey. It was a desperate, chaotic battle as Roar fought them off. His strength and agility unmatched. Max provided cover fire, his blaster cutting down any creatures that got too close. Finally, with the last of the creatures defeated, they managed to breach the lab's door and extract the scientists. But the danger wasn't over yet. The bioweapons containment field was failing, and the only way to stop it from spreading beyond the outpost was to initiate a controlled explosion. Max quickly coordinated with the shuttle pilot and the scientists, setting up the charges to detonate as soon as they were clear. But as they prepared to leave, RAR suddenly froze, his nose twitching as he picked up on something only he could sense. In an instant, RAR bolted down a side corridor, ignoring Max calls to return. Max had no choice but to follow, his heart pounding as he raced after the Garm Roker led him to a small hidden room deep within the outpost where a lone figure, another scientist, was barely clinging to life, unconscious and missed by the original scan. Roar's sharp instincts had saved another life, and Max quickly moved to stabilize the scientist before carrying him back to the shuttle. The charges were set, and they had only moments to spare as they boarded the shuttle and lifted off from the planet's surface. As the shuttle soared into the sky, the outpost erupted in a fiery explosion. The bioweapon and its mutated horrors consumed in the blast. Max collapsed into a seat, exhausted, but relieved. Roar sat beside him, his sides heaving from exertion, but his eyes alert as if ready for the next challenge. Max looked at RAR with profound respect and gratitude. The mission had been a success, but more importantly, Roker had proven once again that he was more than just a warg. He was a hero, a partner, and a savior. When they returned to medical station, the mood was markedly different. The skeptics were silent, their doubts laid to rest by the undeniable evidence of Roar's actions. Colonel Harris met them at the docking bay, his expression one of approval and respect. Sergeant Arlen Roker, the colonel said, his voice carrying a weight of finality, you've not only saved lives, you've proven that there's more to this partnership than anyone could have imagined. The doubts about Roar's place here are over. You've earned your place on the front lines. Max nodded, his heart swelling with pride as he looked at RAR. Thank you, sir. We won't let you down. As Max and RAR walked away, the Garm's head held high. Max couldn't help but feel that they had crossed the threshold of battle, for Roar's acceptance was over, and together they had emerged stronger, ready to face whatever the future might hold. In that moment, Max knew that the bond they shared was unbreakable, forged in the crucible of battle and proven in the heat of danger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together as partners and as friends. The days after the mission on Escander were a strange mix of tension and calm. On the one hand, Max and RAR were hailed as heroes. The station's personnel, who had once eyed RAR with suspicion, now greeted him with admiration. Everywhere they went, they were met with nods of respect and words of gratitude. RAR, for his part, seemed to take it all in stride, his massive frame moving gracefully through the station as he accompanied Max on their rounds. But despite the accolades, there was an undercurrent of unease. That Max couldn't shake. The war was far from over, and he knew that their success had only bought them a temporary reprieve. The Zarnak, a race known for their ruthlessness and efficiency in battle, would not take their defeat lightly. Max had seen it too many times. Before the calm, before the storm, the brief moment of peace that came just before the next wave of violence crashed down. One evening, as the station's artificial night cycle dimmed the lights in the corridors, Max sat in his quarters, staring out the viewport at the stars. RAR lay beside him, his head resting on Max's knee, a comforting presence in the silence. Max absent-mindedly scratched behind Roar's ears, his mind racing with thoughts of the future. He was still lost in thought when his comm unit beeped, breaking the silence. Max answered it, and the stern face of Colonel Harris appeared on the screen. Sergeant Aaron, I need to speak with you. Come to my office. Immediately, Max felt a jolt of adrenaline at the colonel's tone. Yes, sir. On my way. He quickly gathered his gear and gave RAR a reassuring pat. Looks like we've got another mission, buddy. Let's see what the colonel has for us. RAR stood, his large amber eyes locking onto Max's with calm readiness that had become his trademark. Together, they made their way to Colonel Harris's office, the weight of impending action heavy in the air. When they arrived, Colonel Harris was already deep in conversation with Dr. Voss, who gave Max a nod as he entered. The colonel wasted no time in getting to the point. We've intercepted intel from the Zarnak. Colonel Harris began, his voice grave. They're planning a major offensive on one of our key outposts in the Varden system. This outpost is critical to our supply lines and intelligence gathering. If it falls, we could lose the entire sector. Max felt a chill run down his spine. The Varden system was a linchpin in the human military strategy. Losing it could turn the tide of the war in the Zarnak "Favor, what do you need us to do, Sir Harris's eyes narrowed. "I want you and RAR to lead a reconnaissance team. Your mission is to infiltrate the outpost before the Zarnak attack, assess the defenses, and identify any weaknesses that could be exploited. Once you've gathered the intel, you'll stay on site to assist in the defense of the facility." Max nodded, his mind already racing through the logistics of the mission. "Understood, sir. We'll be ready." The colonel leaned forward, his gaze intense. "This mission is critical, Sergeant. The entire Vardan system could depend on the intel you gather. I need to know that you and RAR are up to the task." Max met the colonel's gaze without hesitation. "We won't let you down, Sir." Harris nodded, satisfied with Max's resolve. "Good. Briefing is at 060 hours tomorrow. Make sure you're prepared." As Max and RAR left the office, the weight of the mission settled heavily on Max's shoulders. This wasn't just another mission. This was a turning point in the war. He knew that if they failed, the consequences would be dire, not just for them, but for everyone. In the Vardan system that night, as Max lay in his bunk with Roar curled up at his feet, sleep eluded him. His mind kept replaying the briefing, the stakes of the mission, and the trust that had been placed in him and RAR. He knew they could do it. They had faced worse before, but the enormity of the task still weighed heavily on him. RAR, sensing Max's unease, nudged his hand. With his nose, Max smiled and scratched behind Roar's ears, feeling a surge of gratitude for his loyal companion. "We've got this, buddy," he whispered. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." The next morning, the briefing room was filled with a palpable tension as Max, RAR, and the rest of the reconnaissance team reviewed the mission. Parameters of the room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the holographic display of the Vardan system. Projected in the center of the room, the planet's surface, dotted with strategic outposts and supply lines, was overlaid with flashing indicators representing potential Zarek attack vectors. Colonel Harris stood at the head of the room, his expression stern. "As you all know, the Vardan outpost is a critical asset. Intelligence suggests that the Zarnak are planning a coordinated strike to take it out. Our job is to make sure they don't succeed." He turned to Max. "Sergeant Arland, you and RAR will lead the infiltration. Your primary objective is to gather intel on the outpost offenses and identify any vulnerabilities. Once you've done that, you'll remain on site to assist in repelling the Zarnak attack. Failure is not an option." Max nodded, his face set with determination. "We understand, sir. We'll get the job done." The team was given a final rundown of the mission, and then it was time to move out. Max felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as he suited up, checking his gear and making sure everything was in order. RAR, too, was ready, his armor fitted and his senses on high alert. The shuttle ride to the van system was tense and quiet. The team focused on the task ahead. The stars streak by outside the viewport as they traveled through hyperspace, each minute bringing them closer to the mission start. Max and RAR sat side by side, the bond between them palpable in the stillness. When they arrived in the Vardan system, the shuttle descended through the planet's atmosphere, its engines humming as it cut through the thick clouds. The surface of the planet was a barren, rocky landscape, the outpost standing like a lone sentinel against the bleak horizon. As they touched down, Max felt a sense of foreboding settle over him. The team disembarked, and Max LED the way raw closer to side. The outpost was a heavily fortified structure with walls reinforced with layers of metal and energy shielding. Inside, the soldiers stationed there were on high alert, their faces tense as they prepared for the imminent Zarnak attack. Max quickly set to work assessing the outpost defenses. He moved through the facility with a practiced eye, noting the placement of turrets, energy barriers, and supply depot. RAR sniffed the air, his ears twitching as he listened for any sign of the approaching enemy as they made their rounds. Max couldn't shake the vague feeling that something was off. The defenses were solid, but there was a nagging doubt in his mind, a sense that they were missing something. He trusted his instincts. They had saved his life more times than he could count, and so he pressed on, searching for the vulnerability that he was sure the Zarnak would exploit. It wasn't until they reached the eastern perimeter of the outpost that Max found what he was looking for. A section of the energy barrier flickered intermittently, a small but significant glitch in the otherwise impenetrable defense. Max's heart sank as he realized the implications the Zarek could exploit this weakness, slipping through the barrier and launching a devastating attack from within. Max quickly relayed the information to Colonel Harris and the outpost commander, who immediately set about reinforcing the barrier, but time was running out. The Zarek were already on the move, their attack imminent. The first sign of the assault came as a low rumble in the distance, the ground trembling beneath their feet. Max and Roker took up their positions ready to face the onslaught. The outpost soldiers braced themselves, weapons at the ready, their faces set with grim determination. The Zarnak strike was swift and brutal. Their forces descended on the outposts like a storm. Their war machines tearing into the landscape as they advanced. The outpost turrets opened fire, cutting down the enemy as they approached, but the Zarek pressed on, relentless in their attack. Max and RAR moved as one, engaging the enemy with precision and efficiency born of countless battles. Fought side by side, Roar's keen senses allowed them to anticipate the Zarnak movements, outflanking and outmaneuvering the enemy at every turn. The G's powerful jaws and claws made short work of any Zarnak that got too close, while Max provided cover fire, picking off targets with his blaster. But the battle was far from over. The Zarnak were determined, and their numbers seemed endless as the hours wore on. The outpost defenders began to falter, their energy reserves dwindling and their ammunition running low. Max could see the toll the fight was taking on his comrades, their faces drawn and weary. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, reinforcements arrived. A fleet of human warships descended from the sky, their weapons blazing as they engaged the Zarnak forces. The tide of the battle began to turn. The Zarek, caught off guard by the sudden onslaught, Max and Roker fought with renewed vigor, pushing the enemy back and reclaiming the ground that had been lost. The outpost soldiers rallied their spirits, lifted by the sight of the reinforcements, and together they drove the Zarnak back, forcing them to retreat. As the last of the Zarnak forces fled, Max stood amidst the wreckage of the battlefield, his chest heaving with exertion. Roker stood beside him, his fur matted with dirt and blood, but his eyes bright with the fire of victory. They had done it. They had held the line and protected the Varden system. Colonel Harris arrived on the scene shortly after, his expression one of satisfaction and relief. "You did it, Sergeant. You and RAR held the line when it mattered most. The Varden system is secure. Thanks to you." Max nodded the weight of the battle still heavy on his shoulders. "It wasn't just us, sir. It was everyone. We fought as one, and that's why we won." Harris clapped Max on the shoulder, his respect for the soldier evident in his eyes. "You're right, Max, but don't sell yourself short. You and Roker were the key to this victory. You've proven once again that you're more than just a soldier, and as war, Doug, you're a team, and a damn good one." At that, as the sun began to set over the Varden outpost, casting long shadows across the battlefield, Max looked out at the horizon, his thoughts turning to the future. The war was far from over, but for the first time in a long while he felt a glimmer of hope. They had faced a storm and emerged victorious, and as long as he had RAR by his side, Max knew they could face whatever came next together. They had forged a bond that no enemy could break, a bond that would carry them through the darkest days of the war. And as they stood side by side, watching the stars begin to twinkle in the darkening sky, Max knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger than ever. The aftermath of the battle at the Vardan outpost brought a brief but much-needed respite for Max, RAR, and the rest of the human forces of Zarnak had been driven back, and the Varden system was secure, for now repairs were underway at the outpost, and reinforcements continued to bolster the defenses, ensuring that any future attack would be met with even greater resistance. But even as the dust settled, Max couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. The Zark's attack had been intense, but it lacked the coordination and overwhelming force that Max had come to expect from them. It was as if the assault on the Varden system had been a diversion, a feint to draw the human force's attention away from something much larger. Max shared his concerns with Colonel Harris. During a debriefing, the colonel listened intently, his expression grave, as Max laid out his suspicions. "You think the Zarnak have something else planned?" Harris asked, his tone laced with worry. Max nodded. "I do, sir. The attack on Varden felt like a distraction they threw a lot at it, but it wasn't their full strength. It's almost as if they wanted us to focus all our efforts here while they prepared for something bigger." Harris sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I've been hearing similar concerns from other sectors. There's been an increase in Zarnak activity along the outer rim of our territory, but no major offensives. It's like they're probing our defenses, looking for weaknesses." Max frowned, his mind racing as he considered the implications. "We need to figure out what they're planning, before it's too late, if they're preparing a large-scale assault we have. To be ready, Harris nodded his expression. Resolute agreed. I'll coordinate with the other sectors and see what intel we can gather in the meantime. I want you and RAR to be on standby if the Zarnak are. Planning something big will need you ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Max acknowledged the order and left the colonel's office, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on in the battle at Vardan. Had been a victory, but it was clear that the war was far from over. The Zarnak were a cunning and relentless enemy, and Max knew that they wouldn't rest until they had secured their objectives, whatever they might be. As he returned to his quarters, Max found RAR waiting for him, his eyes sharp, and a 10 of the Garms seemed to sense the tension in the air, his posture alert and ready for action. We might be heading into another fight soon, buddy, Max said, sitting down beside Roker and running a hand through his thick fur. The Zarnak are up to something, and it's only a matter of time before we find out what. RAR responded with a low rumble, his tail thumping against the floor in a show of support Max couldn't help but smile at. The Garm's unwavering loyalty. They had been through so much together, and no matter what lay ahead, Max knew that Roker would be right there by his side, ready to face whatever challenges came their way. It didn't take long for Max's suspicions to be confirmed less than a week after the battle. At Vardan, a series of distress signals began to pour in from the outer rim of human-controlled space. The Zarnak were launching coordinated strikes on multiple fronts, targeting key outposts and supply lines in a bid to human war effort. Max and RAR were immediately deployed to one of the most critical battle zones, a strategic outpost on the planet Alicia, located on the edge of human-controlled space. Alicia was a vital hub for communications and logistics, and if it fell, the consequences for the entire sector would be catastrophic. As their shuttle descended toward the planet surface, Max reviewed the mission briefing, his mind focused on the task ahead. The Zarnak were throwing everything they had at Alicia, and the human forces were barely holding the line. Max and Roar's mission was to bolster the defenses and assist in repelling the Zarnak. Assault the shuttle touched down in the middle of a war zone. The skies were dark with smoke, and the air was thick with the sounds of battle explosions, gunfire, and the roar of engines. Max and RAR disembarked, quickly making their way to the command center to receive their orders. The situation was dire. The Zarnak had already breached the outer defenses and were pushing toward the heart of the outpost. The human forces were stretched thin, struggling to hold their ground against the relentless onslaught. Max and RAR were assigned to a unit tasked with defending a critical choke point and narrow pass that led directly to the outpost command center. If the Zarnak broke through, they would have a clear path to the heart of the facility. The battle that followed was one of the fiercest Max had ever experienced, wave after wave of Zarek soldiers in war. Machines crashed against the human defenses, each attack more brutal than the last. Max and Roker fought side by side, their movements perfectly synchronized as they took down enemy after enemy. RAR was a force of nature, his powerful jaws and claws tearing through the Zarnak ranks with lethal precision. Max provided cover fire, his blaster cutting down any enemy that got too close. The bond between them was stronger than ever, forged in the heat of battle and honed by the countless missions they had undertaken together. But despite their best efforts, the Zarek continued to press forward. The human forces were being pushed back, and it became clear that they couldn't hold the line much longer. Max's mind raced as he searched for a solution, knowing that they couldn't afford to lose this position. Then an idea came to him. A risky, desperate plan might just buy them the time they needed. He quickly relayed his plan to unit commander, who, after a moment of hesitation, gave the go-ahead. Max and Roker would lead a small team in a flanking maneuver, circling around the Zarek forces to hit them from behind. It was a dangerous move, one that would require them to navigate through enemy-infested territory, but it was their best shot at turning the tide of the battle. With the plan in motion, Max and RAR set out with their team moving swiftly and silently through the chaotic battlefield. They encountered pockets of Zarnak soldiers along the way, but Roar's keen senses and Max's sharp shooting kept them one step ahead of the enemy. Finally, they reached their target, a cluster of Zarnak artillery that was hammering the human defenses from a distance. If they could take out the artillery, it was the Zarnak offensive and give the human forces a fighting chance. Max gave the Signal, and they launched their attack. Roker was the first to strike his massive frame, tearing through the Zarnak. Soldiers guarding the artillery max, and the rest of the team followed, setting charges on the artillery emplacements. And providing cover as Roker held off the enemy reinforcements the charges detonated in. A series of deafening explosions, sending the Zarnak artillery up in flames. The shockwave rippled through the battlefield, and the Zarnak forces faltered, their momentum shattered by the loss of their heavy firepower. Seizing the opportunity, the human forces launched a counterattack, pushing the Zarnak back and reclaiming the ground they had lost. The tide of the battle began to turn, and for the first time since the Zarnak assault had begun, victory seemed within reach. But just as the human forces were about to deliver the final blow, a massive Zarnak war machine, a towering, heavily armored behemoth, emerged from the smoke and debris, leading a final desperate charge toward the heart of the outpost Max's. Heart sank as he saw the war machine bearing down on them. It was unlike anything they had faced before. Its thick armor, impervious to standard weapons fire. If it reached the outpost, it would be unstoppable. Roker, sensing the danger, let out a fierce growl and charged toward the war machine, his powerful legs propelling him forward with incredible speed. Max followed, knowing that they had to stop it no matter the cost. As they closed in on the war machine, Max spotted a weak point in its armor, a small exposed section near its joints. It was a slim chance, but it was all they had. RAR. Now Max shouted, and the Garm leaped into the air, his powerful jaws clamping down on the exposed section of the war machine's armor. The war machine staggered, its movements faltering as Roar's teeth tore through wires and circuits. Max fired his blaster at the weak point, driving the attack home. With a final shuddering groan, the war machine collapsed, its towering form crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and debris. The Zarnak forces, stunned by the loss of their greatest weapon, began to retreat. The battle was over. Max stood in the midst of the wreckage, his chest heaving as he caught his breath. Roar stood beside him, his fur matted with blood and dirt, but his eyes gleaming with the satisfaction of victory. They had done it. They had stopped the Zarnak and saved the outpost, but the cost had been high, and Max knew that the war was far from over. As the sun began to rise over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the ruined landscape, Max looked out at the horizon, the weight of the battle still heavy on his shoulders. But as he felt Roker nudge his hand with his nose, a small, tired smile crossed Max's face. They had faced the worst the Zarnak could throw at them, and they had come out on top together. They were unstoppable, and as long as they had each other, Max knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. The war was not over, but Max and RAR would continue to fight side by side, as they always had and as they always would.